Do it right. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. Hopefully this is going to be a useful event for you. I'm just on the screen. Oh, I'm getting really bad feedback off someone. There we go. Stopped. I think somebody wasn't on mute. If you do feel comfortable on video, please do.
If you do feel comfortable on video,
please. Is everyone on mute? Just going to check. There we go. Right. Yeah, please do. I'd like to see your lovely faces. But if you're like, no, it's been a rough week, I totally understand that. So I'm just going to give you like a few introductory slides because I've got to do the bit in terms of, sharing the news about Birmingham Tech Week. So just to give you a bit of a fill in, the reason we're putting on this event is I think everyone knows that D&I, diversity and inclusion, is higher on people's agenda than it ever has been. I think there can sometimes be a bit of confusion in how to kind of take those first steps. Like there's a lot of pressure around to be saying the right things and doing the right things. And sometimes it can just be a bit of a minefield where to start. So what I really wanted to do today was just kind of give you some real life experience that people have had, rather than just have an event full of D&I experts, for want of a better word. I wanted to give you, access to sort of real people with real experiences, and you could kind of find out some actionable insights to take away and hopefully implement at your own companies instead. So like I said to Yanis, thank Birmingham Tech Week for giving us the space to do this. Here are the great companies that are supporting, and we've got Naomi Nash from Tech Nation with us today as well. So thank you, Naomi, on behalf of Tech Nation. And then we've got sponsors that have enabled this whole week to happen. I think it's brilliant that it's managed to happen in such weird times, but as Yana said, it seems to be going really well so far. And a bunch of partners who have supported the week, all of which are great companies and great organizations. And yeah, just put my own company in there as well because there was a slide to do it. Obviously a little bit of promo. So here are the wonderful people we've got talking today. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the agenda, we've got 3 fabulous speakers and then a wonderful panel that's going to be chaired by Sam from Wonder. And then we're going to have a bit of time for a Q&A at the end. If you do think of any questions along the way, do feel free to pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we can do like a hands up situation during the actual Q&A at the end. So with that in mind, I am now going to hand over to Debbie Forster from Tech Talent Charter, who is going to give us a bit of an intro and share her insights on how we can actually start these difficult conversations. So over to you, Debbie.
Hi, thanks so much, Ria, for having me here. And hello, everyone. It's been a busy week, month, 6 months against a broken backdrop of the world. So thanks for being here this morning. So I run something called the Tech Talent Charter. Some of you are a few familiar faces, names, and you are already signatories. What we do is we're trying to drive diversity in tech. And so we bring together the whole ecosystem. Joining is free, but it is bringing together the employers, the organizations who work with employers and the organizations who work with underrepresented groups to try and move the dial on diversity in tech. And we focus on the practical. The reason I like events like this is because I used to hate, the reason we started the charter was when the woman who wrote the charter, Sinead, came and talked to me. I said, if I have to go to one more roundtable event on why there's no women in tech, my head's going to explode. I can't keep talking about the problem. Let's start talking about solutions. And, back in 2017, we knew because we were tiny and we needed to start with a focus. So we started with gender. But we knew that this was going to broaden. And we knew that we had to do that because if all we did was bring a lot of white middle-class women into tech, that wasn't inclusion, that wasn't diversity. And so I've been on this journey for 3 years with companies at every stage. You know, some people are organizations and people who've been doing this for 10 years. And some of the others are those companies that I call the diversity takeaway window approach, that panic, wild-eyed, I've got to be diverse. Can someone quickly find me 2 women, 3 BAME, a disability, and a neurodiverse with an order of chips to go? All right. And you know, no surprises. That didn't go anywhere. And so 2 years ago, we really started doubling down on, we've got to get our culture right. We've got to start with the lens of inclusion. And then last year, at the end of the year, we knew that our members are ready to start leaning in. And so we started saying, and we said we doubled down this year on ethnicity and social inclusion. So COVID has shown us we're not all in it together necessarily. And then BLM opened that door again to remind us that we're not inclusive in terms of Black, in terms of BAME, in terms of ethnicity. So I now work with companies that, because of BLM, are woke, are a little scared. And we're doing what you're doing here, which is starting to try and help people have these conversations, to wander into this space and to stay there and make a difference. And so, you know, there's a way in which I would talk if I was talking to a group of people who'd never done this and had no idea what to do and were bluntly scared. I sense, looking at the names here, you're already on the journey. So a lot of you, I'm talking about how do we help others on the journey? And for some of you, maybe like I was 2 years ago, you know, we'd done things on gender, but this was new space. And things I'm learning and trying to work with people are this. One, if I think about back when we did Tech Talent Chatter in 2017, I loved the mantra that Churchill's never waste a good crisis. And so if you think back in 17, it was Me Too, hashtag Me Too, it was Weinstein, and it was gender pay reporting. And in that crisis, we could lean in and we could try and help people be less scared, more practical, and to create that atmosphere. So I think in 2020, it's where we need to lean in on the discussions around ethnicity, the discussions around Black allyship. And a few things I would say that are important. Number one, it's about trying to get everyone comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now, as women, as white women, we expected men to be comfortable with being uncomfortable if they were going to try and get more women into tech. Now we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. I think particularly in Britain, I've lived here 30 years, we're terribly afraid of getting it wrong. So we do nothing, we say nothing in the hopes that that means we're not doing it wrong. And what this year is reminding us, silence, not saying someone's name for fear of getting it wrong is getting it wrong. There are sins of omission as well as sins of commission. And we've got to lean into being willing to get it wrong, being willing to be corrected, to be educated. We've got to take ownership of being educated. We have to ask the questions. We have to look online. We have to look at those resources. We need to be told. We need to create atmospheres where it is okay to get it wrong and then be corrected. We need to understand and lean into the natural stage that many of us are at on the journey as we move into ethnicity, into disability, into neurodiversity, mental health, LGBTQ. I'm from education. So some of you may know that there are some stages to attain mastery of something. And the analogy that's often used is driving a car. I always use that one. So the stages, there are 4 stages. One is unconscious ignorance. Then we move to conscious ignorance. Then we go to conscious mastery, and then unconscious mastery. So if you think back, when you're a kid, before you start learning to drive, you're real comfortable with that. You get in a car, you have no idea how to do that. You have no idea how people are shifting gears, and you don't care. Then do you remember when you first started to learn to drive a car? And it is that, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing, and that is terrifying. Then you get to the point that you're educated, but you are really thinking, I must do my turn signal. I must ease off the clutch. I must do those things. And then at some stage, we move to that point where we can drive from A to B. And a lot of what we used to terrify us and we had no idea what to do, we can do unconsciously. That's where we are. All right. And the most uncomfortable of all four of those stages is stage 2. And that's conscious ignorance. And that's around us get comfortable with. We now know there's a lot we don't know. We now know there's a lot of things in terms of unconscious bias, in terms of microaggressions, in terms of institutional racism, in terms of those things. And that's okay, so long as we're leaning into that process of we're going to get through being scared, we're going to get educated, we're going to consciously make those choices so that at some stage we move into that unconscious mastery where we are inclusive in our language, where we are inclusive in our cultures, in our behaviors, in building the organizations and the societal institutions that we need to. And then we lean into the next area. What's the next area that we're not getting right? And I think then the second thing, so it's understanding and helping people see a way through the journey. Then it's realizing that we need to listen to the underrepresented groups, and underrepresented groups, you need to lean into being present in all of this. I remember in early days when I was the only woman in the room, and I never leant into correcting things, insisting on things. And I had to find my way of beginning to assert my right to be in that room. And so for some underrepresented groups, we need to support them while they learn how to make that work for them. And we need to give them that right that sometimes they're going to want to lean into it and be happy to educate the rooms. And other times, damn it, they're tired. They get to lean back. They don't have to take responsibility. They don't have to speak for an entire race. They don't have to speak on behalf of huge populations. And we then need to look at one of the most powerful phrases coming out of BLM for me was the phrase of anti-racism. It was not enough not to be a racist. And it's a phrase that we can use across all of those lenses. You know, what we were actively doing in the last 2 years was trying to help everyone, including the men, realize it wasn't enough not to be sexist. They needed to lean into being anti-sexist. We are in a space where we need to lean into being anti-racist. And that gives us, fortunately, things we can do where we can feel useful. We can be a supporter. We can be an ally. If we have any power in the room, we can be a champion to make things happen. I've been around the D&I space actively for about 10 years. Yes, it is depressing that we're still having to have some of the same conversations. But I'd say in the last 2 years, I have seen genuine movement in terms of gender. For the first time in 30, 40 years, as long as I've seen, I'm starting to see some genuine movement on ethnicity. I'm starting to hear discussions around disability. COVID, a recent American president, have shown us progress is never assured. It's only as strong as the step we're taking today. But I have to say, when I look around, I've lived in the UK for 30 years. When I look and see what's happened in the last 5 years, if I look and see what's happened in the last 5 months, more people are woke. More people are leaning in, are taking action, are asking questions, and they're making their power felt. I can see that for the Tech Talent Charter. We have grown since 2017 of 17 companies to over 530 companies. And honey, I have not spent a penny on advertising. So while the world is woke, we lean in. While the world is woke, we offer practical solutions real conversations, safe spaces, and then concrete actions to move on. Today's event is one of those things. So Ria, thank you for convening it. Thank you for leaning forward into this space. I look forward to hearing what comes to the panel, but even more, I look forward to hearing what happens after this event, after today, into the time as we build some brave new future, some new normal. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for leaning into something that's a little uncomfortable.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That was brilliant. I think it's so important that we realise we don't have to get to a perfect level of knowledge and understanding before commencing this work. It is a learning and development exercise. If anyone wants to find out more about joining the Tech Talent Charter, it's absolutely fabulous. Tons of resources, and you're like, what's the catch? And all the catches is that you have to be committed, and you have to provide data, and you have to help them do their work as well. So yeah,
come join us. Resistance is futile. It's free. It's easy. techtalentcharter.co.uk. We'd love, some of you are already on board. If you're not, come on board. There's lots of people on the same journey as you.
Yeah, tons of resources.
Thank you, everyone.
Really helpful. Thank you, Debbie. Right, and now we're going to go over to Gurdip Singh from Calic, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his incredible journey and where he is now.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to really join this. And Debbie, some of the comments you made absolutely resonate with some of the things hopefully I'll cover this morning as well. What I want to do is I want to just give you a couple of perspectives from my own sort of career path and my own career journey. My career really started in technology as soon as I left university. I was very privileged to start working in large-scale organizations, large technology organizations. But recently, only about a year or so ago, I consciously made the decision to take the role of a chief executive, an SME, a UK-based SME. And what I really want to do is really contrast my thoughts on how diversity inclusion really operated, if I can use those words, in large organizations versus smaller organizations. I think some of the words that Debbie used, I quite like some of the phrases, you know, the unconscious mastery. I absolutely do believe that this is an ongoing activity. It is a journey. And there are some people who naturally, excuse me, and instinctively get what diversity and inclusion are. There are others who absolutely do not get it. And our role, regardless of what level we are, is all about leadership. It's all about really education and learning, and it's actually a catalyst for change. If I talk, start with the large sort of company that I worked with, several large companies actually. Many of you probably know these large services organizations typically started to engage projects across the globe. They started to really grow their organizations, have presence in many, many countries. And almost by default, less consciously, they started to bring diversity into their organizations. And this was purely because they were in different countries, as opposed to consciously wanting to do it. If you look at the large IT services organizations, you'll see many of them are incredibly diverse. There's a lot of organizations who, for business reasons, want to offshore. So you see a lot of people from the Asia, the Indian subcontinents, Latin America, because typically that's where the offshoring trend tends to be or has been over the last sort of 20 years or so. But what they're really struggling with is diversity beyond geographic or ethnic sort of areas. And even though they are starting to see more and more people from different countries within their organizations, you still are not getting, other than in small pockets, people starting to embrace the other areas of diversity, not just purely about culture. However, I do feel those companies, you do by default almost have a cheat mechanism in the sense that you are in multiple countries. So if you go into Spain, naturally, you know, the local population is who you hire. You start to bring them in, you start to do global projects, and by default, you start to mix organizations. What I really believe to make diversity successful is you do need catalysts. And individuals like ourselves, I believe, are the catalysts. And as I said, catalysts is about people who are in different levels of an organization. In our company, we are a small software organization. We're based out of Birmingham. We deliver to Fortune 500 customers around the world. And in order to really bring diversity and inclusion to the agenda, it really does need someone or groups of people actually taking it serious. It needs people who embrace it, people who evangelize it, people who really start to help those people who don't understand what it means. And most importantly, deliberately change the mix. I mean, one of the things that we've done at CALIC is that we had predominantly, a very typical, and don't want to sound offensive, very typical middle-aged white senior leadership team just before I joined. One of the things that we did as a leadership team post that was to flatten the structures, to change the number of people we had on the senior executive team, but also bring in diversity into our senior leadership team. Is very, very different today to what it was 8-9 months ago. Once you start to mix that and you bring diversity by its nature breeds diversity. And what I mean by that sounds probably a bit corny, but if you have an organization that come from the same socio-economic gender group, typically, people do tend to hire in their own patterns or their own molds. By bringing in diversity into the organization, people absolutely feel there's a sense of belonging, or there's an organization that wants to have diversity. And by nature, they also drop down barriers and boundaries. I think it's really, if you really look at diversity, and certainly from my perspective, I actually think you have to look at diversity as to what it gives you versus what it doesn't. I think often we tend to, as human beings, focus on the negatives about the differences we see in other cultures, in other genders, in what people like, what dislike, as opposed to seeing the value of what diversity brings to us as an organization. As I mentioned, I've been incredibly fortunate to work around the world. I mean, at one point, I had projects in over 30, 40 countries, as far as the west coast of California to the furthest east coast of New Zealand. And I had the opportunity to travel to pretty much all of these countries. And what I really saw and what I really learned from how diversity came together was actually by bringing people with different ideas, different backgrounds, you bring an outstanding level of creativity and innovation that you do not get if you bring the same kind of groups together. With that innovation, you also get lots of other learnings and some amazing relationships develop. A very funny story, I was working in the US, in Texas. Texas are not that diverse for most people who know Texas in the US. And I was working with a local team, working with an Indian team as well. And we decided to go out for dinner. To cut a long story short, that day we ended up in an Ethiopian restaurant, met a female Ethiopian pop star, and were introduced to a culture that even today, if you met any of the 10, 11 people that shared that experience, will talk about. That kind of learning you do not get if you do not embrace what diversity means and embrace the value of people as different cultures, different backgrounds, different genders. And what I really feel very strongly about is that, back to what I said at the start, we have to be that catalyst. CALIC deliberately, I have a role to play as the chief executive by really sponsoring, encouraging, evangelizing this. But everyone has a role to play in the organization. Everyone has a role to play by embracing it, by really looking at what value it brings, but also learning from the experience as well. Because the one thing I will say is, it is not a smooth ride. It absolutely is a bumpy ride. And what you've got to do, like anything, is continue to really, sort of power through it. I think Debbie talked about, the role of, as someone who's diverse, really saying, look, I have a place here. And I say that to anyone really in this space. It is about holding your place. It is about very much evangelizing it. It's very much about embracing it, but recognizing there will be bumps along the way. I've been incredibly fortunate. I think the IT industry, certainly over the last 20, 30 years, has started to see a different mix within its workforce. The introduction of the sort of Indian players, the introduction of work that's now being done in different regions, in Asia, in Latin America. So you are starting to see a greater mix. If you sat back 20 years ago, would anyone have ever said, some of the greatest software companies like Microsoft, Google would have had, Indian leaders at their helm? So there definitely is an awakening that is allowing people to be able to step into these roles. But most importantly, we have to recognize that the journey never ends, and it's important to continuously make sure that you sponsor and embrace that and evangelize it within your organizations. But make the start, don't step back, make the start. And as Debbie said as well earlier this morning, if you make that start slowly, you will chip away at it. And actually from it, you will realize the rewards you get from having diversity and inclusion within your organization. And you see a fundamental shift in your culture as well, because your people also start to embrace it as well, not just one or two or three lone leaders who think it's something very important to have within their business. Bri, I don't know if that gives you certainly gives people a bit of background.
Thank you so much, Gerda. That was really, really interesting. And I think your point about it being a journey is so valid. We can't go into this thinking there's going to be an end point to it. It is going to be continuous learning and continuous development. So I think it's really important to go into this work with that in mind and knowing it's going to be like a long haul rather than something you can tick the box off as done in 6 months' time. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, one of the things I was going to say, look, I mentioned some people get it instinctively. There are people who absolutely get it instinctively. And like any skill, and I do consider this to be a skill, and Debbie talked about clearly the 4 stages, practice is what makes perfect or close to perfect. And we have to continuously practice and practice. It's like any sports person, someone playing football, they may take a penalty 100, 1,000 times to the point where it becomes instinctive. And that's really how you have to see this. It's an ongoing journey and you have to continuously practice at it. And really, we should knock down barriers. We tended to hire very local. We've removed those barriers. We've opened up the market to hiring wherever. We also looking at treating people the same. I think this is really, really important that we are all the same, in simple terms. And most importantly, like what I said at the start, actually look at the different backgrounds, the different cultures, the different genders, the different experiences and upbringings that we have. Look at the positives of what that brings, as opposed to always looking at the negatives and therefore excluding and building prejudices. I think if we embrace those, it's amazing the amount of differences you will see, not only in the working life, but in your personal lives as well. And that's certainly my experience and certainly what we're seeing in our company as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gerda. That's been really, really useful.
Thank you.
And next up, we're going to go over to Amrit from Transformation West Midlands, who's going to talk about their fantastic reverse mentoring program.
Great, thanks, Ria. I'm just going to share my screen and I hope this works. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Right, so hello everyone. Thank you very much, Ria, for inviting me to this talk today. So I'm very much going to speak about the project that I work on, which is Transformation West Midlands, which is all about supporting underrepresented groups of students accessing higher skilled employment, but also how we're supporting local businesses in their diversity and inclusion agendas. Before I give you an overview of what the project actually entails, I just wanted to bring this quote up. And this actually wasn't in my slide yesterday. So one of my friends asked me to download an app which sends you a daily quote. And if I'm honest, I'm not a fan of quotes, and I was actually about to delete the app. But this actually popped up today and I had to include it in the slides. So you can all read it. And the beauty, I think, of anything is that we'll all interpret and perceive something based on how we might be feeling, our own current or past experiences, how we might be feeling on that day. And for me, I feel like this kind of covers my own kind of feelings of kind of diversity and inclusion and why we're all here today, because we're all from different organizations. We all speak about diversity within our own organizations. We all show and pledge that we are making changes to be diverse and to be inclusive, but we all know that's not enough. And the bit that is missing is the inclusion, it is the involvement. So for me, again, involve me and I'll understand, you'll understand. It's so key that we have honest and open conversations, because that is the way forward to actually being able to action and make a change. So Transformation West Midlands, who are we? So this is actually a partnership project between 3 West Midlands-based universities. So it's the University of Birmingham, Newman University and University College Birmingham. And we're actually funded by the Office for Students, who are the regulatory body for universities in England. Now, these funds have very much come about to support students who are from the local region and helping them to access higher skilled employment, because there is an issue with local students accessing local higher skilled jobs. But in particular, we're very much focused on supporting underrepresented students in accessing higher skilled employment, because within the mix of local students, these groups of individuals are the ones who are struggling the most. And how we're supporting them is that at each university, we have recruited a progression coach. And the role of the progression coach is to work with students who are at risk of unemployment or underemployment and helping them kind of navigate the world of work. So looking at goal setting, looking at what the barriers are that they're facing in accessing employment. And, you know, we've all read about groups of students not doing as well as other groups of students, and it's very much tackling this at its core. So our progression coaches are very much working closely with the students to understand what are the issues that they're facing. And then we're then able to work with externals to offer personalised support to these students to hopefully help them to progress. Now, where you will come in and why I'm invited to this talk is because we know we can do all we can as a career service, as universities, to prepare our students for the world of work. But if the world of work doesn't represent themselves, then that's an issue. So what we're doing is working with local employers and kind of influencing in the area of diversity inclusion through what's known as reverse mentoring. So what is reverse mentoring? Some of you might have heard of this concept, but for some of you, it might be a new concept. So just to quickly go over it. So typically mentoring, as you're all aware, it's someone more senior imparting their knowledge, wisdom, expertise to someone much more junior who will benefit from the guidance. In reverse mentoring, this concept is very much flipped on its head, whereby it's more junior individuals mentoring senior staff on their own experiences, on their own perspectives, so that both sides and both parties can learn from one another. And especially reverse mentoring is quite well being trialled and piloted within, I would say mainly the business, finance and professional services sector here within the UK. And mainly it's kind of BAME staff networks and LGBTQ staff networks and women networks who have trialled the concept of reverse mentoring within the organisations to just pair people from different walks of life, different experiences, different backgrounds, so that they could share and learn with one another. And what Debbie and Gertie have said, having those honest conversations and creating a space to have those honest conversations. But in terms of our project, what we're doing is we're actually pairing local organisations from the West Midlands with groups of students from across the 3 universities who can share with them, you know, how can you recruit and attract people like me? So it's very much students looking at their diversity inclusion agendas, looking at how they market and communicate and attract diverse individuals. Now, arguably, reverse mentoring, and from our experience of piloting reverse mentoring last year, it is more complex in that because it is role reversal and it is more junior individuals mentoring at times and very senior individuals in organisations. It is a challenging relationship to manage because we've had to do a lot of work in enabling our students and graduates to be able to feel confident in having effective conversations. So that's something we've learned a lot, but again, it's about creating that safe space, and a lot of the organisations did do that where students were honest with them. So who we're working with, so last year when we piloted the scheme, we mainly only worked with business, finance and professional services sector. So we worked with HSBC, 2 law firms, Gowling and Shoesmiths, and a smaller accounting firm, BS and Associates. And we learned a lot along the way in piloting the scheme. And this year we've massively upscaled to not just work with professional services, but to work with health and life sciences, public service, as well as technology. And actually hats off to Dan Rodriguez, because I actually incorporated working with technology organisations because of Dan and the conversations that he's having in this space. So you can see a few tech firms there, Salty, we've got FDM Group and Air Liquide there as well. But I think what's really great about working with so many of these organisations is that they can all learn from one another in terms of what they're doing around diversity and inclusion, and kind of pairing them up with students and graduates who have a, who want a voice, who have things to say, has been really powerful. But just to put it into context, this scheme, I would say, is mainly of benefit for the employers who are on our scheme. And what they're really getting from the scheme is what I've listed just here that you can see. So it's very much hearing directly from the students and graduates, what methods should they be using to attract and target diverse students? How can they help identify any unconscious biases? What are the potential barriers that are preventing students and graduates from applying? Because we all know that students are applying, but they're either not being successful or they're not progressing up the ranks in the same way. So it's very much tackling those issues and having conversations around that. Some other organisations felt like their organisation brand wasn't out there, so they wanted some information around that from students. Some students actually trialled going through the actual recruitment process for the employers and giving them feedback on that from their own perspective in terms of how they found being an applicant, going through an interview. And some of them also interviewed a few line managers about their own recruitment practices and fed back to them as well. In terms of what students and graduates got from the scheme, so as I said, mainly I would say the scheme is of benefit to the employers because they're benefiting from the experiences of the students and graduates, but the students themselves got a lot of experience from the scheme as well. So a lot of the students going into the scheme might have had their own preconceived conceptions about the organisation and saying things like, I don't know if they would recruit and attract someone like me. So really kind of putting them in the mix with employers and then being able to speak to them. A lot of them walked out saying, oh, we realise actually they're just like me, or they're just regular people, and I do see myself fitting into that culture of the organisation. So kind of on both sides, I would say mindsets were shifted in terms of perceptions either the students might have had about certain sectors, certain organisations, but also organisations were able to learn from student mindsets in terms of them putting up their own barriers and blockers in terms of not wanting to apply to someone because they felt like, well, we wouldn't ever fit into that organisation. And then also for the students, because a lot of the students we work with from underrepresented backgrounds don't have the social networks, their parents might not necessarily come from professional backgrounds. So being able to pair them up with key organisations in the West Midlands was key in terms of them forming connections with people in organisations who they might want to go and work with in the future as well. So in terms of how we lead the actual scheme as 3 universities, we've all said talking is important. The power of conversation is so crucial, but it shouldn't stop there. And the way that we lead the scheme is, yep, conversations lead to ideas, ideas lead to actions, and action needs to change. And, you know, we spent a lot of time training our students in terms of, you know, how they kind of form ideas with the organisations, how they hold them accountable in terms of how they then implement those ideas and turn them into actions, and how they then implement change, no matter how big or small. And we as a project also, once kind of mentoring was concluded and conversations were had, we went in and asked them, okay, as a result of conversations, what did you learn? What actions are you going to put forward, and what change will be made in your organisation? And almost every organisation, all organisations pledged that they would make changes. And again, for the sake of showing that it wasn't all just talk, you can see here some of the learning, impact and accountability that some of the organisations said they would make as a result. So this is just quite fresh actually, because kind of over the last few weeks, I met with all of the organisations who were on the scheme last year to say, okay, as a result of mentoring, what are you doing now? And you can see here the first bubble. One of the employees actually said that she realised how many students she actually discounted in the recruitment process just based off their confidence. And what we're finding through our project is a lot of underrepresented students do have a lack of confidence. So she said that I realised that my recruitment process is so daunting, but having worked so closely with your students, she goes, I realised how many I just discount based off confidence, but they actually have a lot to bring to the table. So she was looking to run a more relaxed and informal screening method for students when it comes to recruitment, so that they feel a bit more relaxed and not so kind of daunted by who it is across the table. In terms of other organisations, realise that perhaps for single parent families, and especially for women, that perhaps they're not doing so great in terms of marketing how they do offer flexible working policies to women. So they're pledging to make that a lot more visible on their pages.
Thanks, Amrit. I'm just a bit concerned about time for the panel. Are you okay just to finish up with how people can contact you if they're interested in getting involved with? Oh, perfect. There we go.
There you go. If you go on this website, you can find out more, and then you can email me if you want to find out more about the scheme, and I hope it helps you kind of taking this forward if it is an idea you want to take forward in your own organisations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amrit, and hopefully people will get in touch if they think that's right for them, and it does sound like a really useful programme. As I said, I'm conscious of time. We are running a little bit behind. We're going to switch over to the panel now that Sam is going to be leading. If you do feel able to stay for like 5 extra minutes at the end, if you've got questions and things, please do feel free. Alternatively, if you email me at any point, if you want to be in touch with any of the speakers, I'm sure they'd be happy to hear from you separately. Right, Sam, over to you.
Great, thanks, Ria. Yeah, it's been fascinating listening to those talks. So I'm really excited to be joined with the panel now as well. So if I could just do a brief introduction of who's going to be involved. We're going to be speaking with Leon Barrett from Project 383, Matt Adam from We Are Digital, Priyanka Juti, who's the chair of the Computer Science Society at Aston University, and also Clive Borden from Board Secure, and with a lot of other experiences as well. I think one of the big things I'm getting from the conversation is how, like Debbie mentioned, that culture is important in terms of the education that we're going on. Gurdip almost mentioned that this can be something that's consciously designed into society and also into our workforces and our businesses. And I really liked Amrit's presentation there, and that quote was very apt for inclusivity. Everyone I've just mentioned who's joined the panel, I wondered if you could just give a 30-second introduction about yourself and what it is you do for everyone listening. Leon, if you wouldn't mind starting with yourself, and we just go through everybody first.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Morning, everybody. My name's Leon, and as I mentioned, I work at 383, so I'm product director there. So I sit on the leadership team, and my role really is twofold. One thing is to look at the strategic direction of 383 and what we offer to our clients. We're a product studio and we create digital products and services. And the other part then is to lead a team of people, and that ranges from strategists to product owners, designers, engineers, and project managers as well. And yeah, I was really interested to come on this after a conversation with Dan, actually, and we were speaking about race in the workforce predominantly. And I guess I've probably got first-hand experiences. So, you know, in terms of diversity, I can probably bring my own experience into the mix. So a little bit about me there.
Thanks, Leon. Matt, would you mind introducing yourself as well, please?
Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. Really good to be here. So I'm the chief executive and founder of a company called We Are Digital. We're headquartered in Coventry, and we are a digital and financial inclusion training provider. So we have a network of trainers, centres all around the UK. So we work in about 40 different regions, and we essentially help people to get online and digitally upskill themselves on the digital side. And then on the financial inclusion side, we help people to manage their money, get debt advice, and that sort of thing. So we mainly work with housing associations across the UK, a bit with central government and the Home Office, and then we do some work with corporates like Lloyds Bank and Openreach as well.
Thanks very much, Matt. And Priyanka as well, if you could please.
Hi, so I'm currently the chair of Aston Computer Science Society, and I'm also a second-year computer science student at Aston University. We're a student-led society. I help lead and develop and facilitate the society's vision alongside our members.
Thank you very much. And Clive as well, that'd be great.
Morning, everyone. So I do a mixture of things right now. The commonality is I tend to like a challenge, and what I tend to therefore focus on is how to build processes and systems to drive that challenge or solve that challenge. And that ranges right now from a startup that I'm working on, focusing on board development, board skills, and board process. I help run a couple of SMEs, particularly focused on education and creativity. So one's a Queen's Award winning musical instrument manufacturer. And then the voluntary capacity, I've just joined the board of Birmingham Museums Trust, pre-COVID, at an interesting time ahead of the Commonwealth Games, but with a number of things. Clearly COVID's had a major impact on the operations of the Birmingham Museums Trust, but with the Commonwealth Games ahead, with the impact of BLM in terms of the way we organised, what we're there to do, and how we represent the communities we serve, which is, you know, a core part of our focus. Really interesting time in terms of this debate and how that challenge is unfolding. And I'm also involved in setting up the first national governing body for the new Olympic sport of skateboarding, which should have happened in Tokyo a few weeks ago. I clearly am a natural skateboarder by looks and profile, and obviously, you know, that was the reason I was chosen. But on a more serious level, my skills really around finance and process. 8 skaters who had built a community organisation wanting to take part in the Olympics and get people nominated for Olympic participation. And I've been working with Sport England and UK Sport on setting that up. Fascinating challenge. Sport in particular has a massive diversity challenge at board level across the country, and you know, with participation and other things. It's a really interesting time in that debate. But that's me, Sam. So.
Thank you, everyone. Sounds fascinating, the insight and experience that you all have from different angles. So we'll get straight into it to hear a bit more about that. Obviously, with a lot of the conversation today, people have talked around how COVID has affected this year and obviously with Black Lives Matter, but there's been a sense of pausing and reflecting, it feels, across this year when people have had that opportunity. I just wanted to ask whether, for everybody on the panel, how this has impacted maybe your own organisations or maybe the clients you work with, or even Priyanka with, you know, students and your peer group at the university as well. Just a sense of what's been happening from that side of things with your organisations and what you're involved in. Maybe if Matthew, you wouldn't mind starting us off with the work you've been involved in and the clients. Just what have been some of your observations?
Yeah, I think you can just tell from lots of the conversations we're having in the marketplace that it is making a massive difference. And I think in terms of, you know, what everyone said today, for me, what we're feeling is it's a bit of a culmination of all of the different movements. So I think, as was mentioned previously, you know, sort of Me Too combined with Black Lives Matters and everything that's been going on, I think it's all created a big wave that feels like it's not temporary anymore and that it's here to stay. And so just to give a few examples, we work mostly in social housing, as I mentioned. What we find incredible about social housing as an industry is we can't think of any other market sector really that probably has every demographic of person sort of under their roofs. And that makes them really unusual, I think, actually. And so it's fascinating working with them. And yes, you know, we work with up to sort of 80, 100 or so of those clients. And you can tell it's gone from just a bit of lip service, perhaps previously, to them wanting to fix this into their programs now and actually do something about it longer term. So, and you can tell that actually from the people of whose role it is to look after that and how that's changing in terms of job titles and the responsibility it's going under. There's other examples about young people and the traineeship program we're offering now, but I know we might come on to that. So yeah, I think that's what we're sensing right now.
Thanks, Matt. And Clive, from your experience as well, particularly at the board level and things, what sort of changes are you seeing or even challenges perhaps?
Well, I think about 2 immediate examples. So that the Museums Trust, where, like I said, I'm a newcomer and therefore learning. COVID has plunged the organisation into a very difficult place. You know, sites literally closed overnight, large workforce, large community engagement piece going on, and in, you know, looking ahead towards Commonwealth Games, looking ahead towards the way the museums could be developed. 7 sites across the city, together with the Think Tank Museum and the Central Art Gallery. actually, so our focus right now has suddenly switched to how to stay alive, how to keep people employed, how to keep doing what we're there to do as a charitable aim. And over the summer period with BLM and some of the other D&I issues that have come through, actually it's been a brilliant time to get engaged with that organisation, because they've become much more embedded in the way we're thinking about what we're there to do. Because actually a time of crisis has stimulated, we're lucky to have a new chair in place as well. So it's a great time for change. And actually what has happened through the COVID situation is that actually we're really focusing on what we're there to do. The cultural appropriation issues, BLM, who we're serving, the community, the whole piece has just got a little bit more urgent. Now, we knew going in, certainly joining the board, I knew I was there to help drive change, because actually at board level, organisations are always, or good organisations should always be changing. And that was one of the appeals of joining at that time, was that I knew there was another cycle of change coming up. Clearly nobody predicted COVID at the start of the year. Yeah, interesting time. The other example, Sam, is probably on the skateboarding side. We were lucky enough over the last couple of years to have a female chair for the first time in our existence. Well, the organisation is 2 years old, so first time in existence. Our first chair was a female. And what's been interesting, skateboarding, 750,000 participation across the UK, mostly diverse audience, mostly underrepresented in other sports. A really interesting sports case, where the demographic is typically not engaged in other sports forms. So from a national funding perspective, an interesting business case in that regard. What's been interesting with Lucy chairing the organisation has been the impact she has made, both as an organisational leader and also the impact she's had on the sport and the participation of women. So we're proud to say over the last year or so, we've seen a massive impact in the amount of females, particularly younger females, getting involved in skateboarding, because they've got a role model to look up to. The head of the organisation is a female. They can look up, they can see Lucy, who's a performance skater herself. The other thing is, you may have seen a 12-year-old that should have been Britain's youngest ever Olympian a few weeks ago. Hopefully will still be that person next year. Although she just had a major accident with Tony Hawk. But we have a 12-year-old called Sky Brown, who just happens to be one of the world's best skateboarders at that tender age. And again, the participation levels for young females, because they can see the change, if that makes sense. So that's one of the been one of the interesting things about being involved in that organisation, is how role models change participation.
I think that's really, really interesting, Clive, and Matt, also with your point around it not being temporary. I wondered, Priyanka, if you could share some of your feelings as well of how you see the world and the future, and just touching on some of those points that maybe Clive and Matt have mentioned about it not being temporary. What are kind of your thoughts and observations going into technology as well, and as a younger person entering the workforce? What kind of thoughts do you have around this topic?
As a young person, it's important to create an inclusive environment, and as a student, there was a lot of energy within our committee to want to do something, but it was wondering, how do we fit in into this sort of bigger system. Since the Black Lives Matter movement, in particular, we thought we can start discussions within our society. And we've recently collaborated with WEST, the Women in Engineering, Science and Technology Society, to look in particular about racially biased innovation. So on Wednesday, we did a webinar, and it was through this research that we did that we were able to open up discussions, not only looking at sort of gender diversity and racial diversity, because I think that's what our immediate focus is looking at, but also disabilities. And through the discussion, we're able to understand different perspectives.
I think that's really interesting with discussion. And one of the things I'd like to move to Leon, if that's okay as well. Thank you, Priyanka, because you talk there about having that dialogue. And I know, Leon, I heard your podcast with Dan Rodriguez as well. And I know role models, when you spoke about, your own daughter, are such an important influence on society, so people can see what they can become and that culture can bed in. Just could you share some of your thoughts and observations, either from your own organisation or as a leader in business, and what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this idea of sort of maybe we call it unconscious bias, is something that I don't think, I think we know it's there, but we don't quite realise what it is. And that story that you mentioned there around role models is really important, because I think it has an impact on you as a person in terms of what you think you can achieve based on the people that you see around you. So for me, that's about us making sure that someone like myself, I put myself out there for other people to then see, to be that inspiration. Now, it might be something very small, but I think it's really important that you can then look up and say, that is achievable to me, I can do that. And the thing about my daughter is that she, like most girls, sort of 4-year-old, into Frozen and Princess and things like that. And she was putting on some white gloves. And I said, oh, what are you doing there? And she said, oh, well, I want to be a princess, and princesses don't have the colour skin that I have. So she'd already formed in her mind at 4 the fact that something wasn't attainable to her. And that's really important, to make sure that when we talk about diversity, it's not just about representation, it's about making sure that people are aware they can get there. Mm-hmm. I think related to that, when we look at recruitment, and as an employer, you might think that you're being fair in terms of recruitment, but the challenge that I see is that the pool isn't wide enough. So yes, we might strive to ensure that we've got a diverse workforce, but if the people coming in to be interviewed aren't diverse enough, then that's going to limit the ability to actually have that diverse workforce. So again, I think it's then, as leaders, what can we then do collectively to reach down and to make it more visible to people? And almost at university level, that's probably too late. It goes much further than that. And I think then, just going back to the point you mentioned at the start around COVID, I think the remote working, even though we were set up to work remotely before, what that has done is it's broadened our talent pool wider than just the region. We're now looking at people in a further field. So I think that in itself has been a strange positive, just to in terms of what would be a geographical restriction, you've been able to open up then. So yeah,
that's a really interesting point. And Matt, maybe going back to the traineeships, just in regards to Leon's point there about bridging that gap as well. And actually, inclusivity is more than necessarily race. There's also socioeconomic issues afoot. What are some of the things you're seeing from the companies you're working with, or the traineeship program you're running, that are showing how we can bridge that gap if we're conscious about it?
Sure, yeah. So we've been preparing for the last 3 months a brand new traineeship program for young people. So just for those that may not be aware, that's 19 to 24-year-olds, and it's kind of seen like a pre-apprenticeship. So people that aren't quite ready for apprenticeships, they've had no work experience or a job before, and they haven't progressed past an A-level qualification. And we've put together what we think is quite, a new modern take on a traineeship in digital marketing, because it's, very engaging for young people. And I think what was fascinating to us that relates to D&I is that one of the big requirements of a traineeship program, it's a nationally recognized government scheme, there's lots of rules and regs, was that you have to get employers on board who will provide work experience placements. And we thought this would be very difficult given COVID. We're going to all these digital marketing companies, big and small, saying, can you take on work experience individuals, as you're dealing with furlough and redundancies and trying to survive, as Clive said. So we thought it was very tricky. What we've been absolutely blown away by is the response, and so many employers have signed up, way more than we needed actually for our targets. And it sounds so simple now, but looking back, the reason that is, and I've been on every single call with these employers, and this is the chief executives, the head of people, head of HR saying this, is that it's because of diversity and inclusion that they want to get involved. So actually it's not really to do with recruitment, and it's not to do with just general sort of issues around it's a nice thing to take on a few work experience people. It's all diversity and inclusion. And the reason, when you break it down, is that if you think about the sector, it's a very sexy, exciting industry, digital marketing. Why would you not want to be paid full time to be a TikTok creator? Young people are bursting to get into this scene, but all the employers, big and small, told us that they had no issue recruiting because of that. I mean, some of these employers get 500 applications a week. But the reason they took our call, and the reason they're so interested, is none of them have cracked the diverse and inclusive recruitment funnel for their pipeline, and they actually, all of them have said no one can do it for them, as in genuinely no one has been able to come to them and help them with that yet. So they've used consultants, they've used recruiters, they've used special D&I consultancies, and they literally say to us, which I found amazing, that no one has cracked that yet for them. So of course they were biting our arm off, because we're going to funnel through lots of diverse and excluded young people for this program with our housing association links. And yes, just to point out, there's targets on women in tech, BAME and ethnic minority, low income individuals, etc. But I just found that really interesting, that was the reason why they wanted to get involved, and also what they're really struggling with.
Yeah, it just shows the reflection of our times at the moment, doesn't it, really? And with maybe Priyanka, if you wouldn't mind reflecting again on the research and the dialogue you've been having with your colleagues. What kind of things do you expect from leaders and the workforce to equip or to create that dialogue internally in the workplace? Excluding technology per se, it could be any business really.
It's really just about having a discussion. From my experiences with companies trying to get involved with students, it initially does feel like lip service, because they just want stats about the makeup of our society. And then in the meeting, we just want to talk about, so what are they doing? And sometimes, I mean, there's been sort of posts on social media that they do support Black Lives Matter or Pride, but it just feels more like it's a post. What are they actually doing, or can we hear more about their actions? And can they listen and talk with us, because we would like to get involved. We don't know how, and we'd all like to learn what's the best approach.
That's really interesting. So is it almost trying to create those transparent situations where there's a safe conversation to be had in that sense?
Yeah, being completely transparent and having a conversation which doesn't feel like they're trying to tick boxes with us.
Yeah. And Clive, in terms of what you've been seeing, you're involved in so many different organisations there, from museums and art galleries through to skateboarding. What would you recommend in terms of actions, I suppose, for people listening as to how to create those spaces and dialogues?
Okay, so there's two thoughts, possibly slightly off piece for that question, Sam, but just thinking of what Priyanka's just said. So first things first, in terms of a number of the boards I sit on, we struggle when we go out to find people with skills that, skills audits. A lot of the time, and I see a number of the same names come back. So it's a two-way thing at times in this debate, in that actually there are building confidence people, going back to the role model piece, and building leaders that people can relate to and people can aspire to be is part of the job on this side, the board side, if you like. But also the other side is building confidence people to apply for roles is one of the challenges I see. And then one of the reasons behind the business idea I'm working on, one of the ideas with some of the sort of the voluntary boards I sit on, is building confidence, building skills, and also finding people who want to either volunteer or get involved. Because actually, I may be lucky, the boards I'm on tend to be changing things or have already recognised the need. Because like I said, I tend to like a challenge to start with rather than inertia. I think Priyanka's talking about, a slightly different environment, maybe a more corporate environment, potentially target driven and other things where there's a business case for it. I tend to be in the non-business case where I'm, brutally, I'm simply looking for the best board, the best team, because for me, diversity and inclusion is about the best mix of skills to drive the business forward. And if we all point in the same way and we think the same thing, we will hit a bridge at some point going forward, because businesses, COVID is a brilliant example of that. Who'd have thought a number of businesses that are flying now would have been flying 9-12 months ago, vice versa. Some of the best businesses in the world, think about hospitality, Birmingham, think about the number of restaurants, the amazing cultural scene we have in Birmingham, suddenly literally overnight closed down. Who could have predicted that debate? So two tips. One of which is don't be shy of volunteering. Pauline's just jumped off the call, but Pauline's part of the Small Charities Coalition. One of the routes I got into volunteering was simply somebody asked me in my case, but also I've since volunteered for things. If I've seen something I like, I've gone and asked people if there's any way to get involved. One of the observations to Priyanka is first things first is volunteer or ask people, or because actually part of driving change is also bottom up, not just top down. Boards have a responsibility for sure. And if you're on a board right now, the one tip I would say from the work I've done thus far is do a skills audit. Debate, having a conversation around the mix of skills around the table is the best way to work this debate through, because it opens people's eyes. You know, it's not a pun, but no, it just makes you think about where you're going, what markets you serve, who you've got around the table, etc. But the other tip would be, certainly in Priyanka's case, the career all ahead of you, with the skills and the personality and the drive you've got, Priyanka, please volunteer and get involved in things if you can, because it will drive your CV. It will also drive the boards you sit on, and we can then work bottom up. Sorry, Sam, slightly off.
No, I think that's a great point, and having that openness from the board level to be like you've just done there, Clive, to say that Priyanka is welcome. That kind of message is where that's powerful. Then, so people can approach.
There is no way in the world. I have a 17-year-old daughter. My daughter uses technology, terms for. Ria knows my daughter, and there's no way in the world I could understand my daughter's world, because I'm an 18 in my head, but I'm slightly older than 18 naturally. I need people like Priyanka, frankly, and I'd suggest a lot of boards. Certainly in the city of Birmingham, that's one of the joys of working in Birmingham and the West Midlands, is it's a community-based environment. Please volunteer, please work with people like Dan who are building, more inclusive boards, more diverse boards, full stop. But it's about using your skills. That's the way I'd see it.
Thank you very much there, Clive. And Leon, if you wouldn't mind commenting on maybe what you're hearing there as well, just some of your thoughts around how we bring that inclusivity from a bottom-up approach, is where Clive's talking as well as a top-down. What are your thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of nodding from me there, Clive, on that, in terms of, I think I guess diversity is multifaceted, and I think people can bring their own experiences into it, but their own experiences might be in one part of it. So naturally, the more people you have, the more parts that you have there, the more diverse you'll be in your thinking, in your approach, and how you do things. And I think that's, speaking from 3 at 3, that's one of the things that we've always looked at really is yes, we want to get the best people in, but we also want to make sure there's a diverse background, and part of our recruitment process seeks that out. So we have an element that looks at your capability. So are you fit for the job? But then also, who are you as a person? And actually we spend a lot of time looking for that mix. So what we're after is people that have the shared traits of what makes a 3 at 3 who we are. But then also that people bring in their own things into it as well. So part of our interview process is an element called Love Your Craft, and everyone presents 60 seconds on something that they do about their crafts. That might be baking, it might be singing, whatever it's going to be. We've had all sorts of things coming in there, and that's because we want to get a range of different experiences into the business, because I think that helps us with decision making, that helps us with communication, and that enriches the way that we operate. And I think the thing that we strive for is to open that up, and to look into it. So, we've got people that are from all different sorts of backgrounds, living, with people that live in Spain, France, Greece at the moment as well. And it's about having that melting pot, for want of a better word, because if we're all the same, or we all do the same thing, we're going to end up with very similar results. And, part of our business is creativity, so we need to have those different influences as well. The thing about sort of bottom up is, I guess it's on all of us really. So I mentioned before about role models, and if I think back to sort of 20 odd years ago when I was doing work experience, probably don't look that old, that it was about seeing people that I could relate to, and that spoke like me or looked like me, and that's really powerful. And I think there was one person, I did some work experience at the BBC, and I could look at him and I think, wow, he's here. This one black face amongst a sea of other white people. That's amazing. That could be me. Maybe not in this area, but in something else. And it's about then reaching back down and doing that same thing for the people coming back up. So I would say get yourself a mentor, somebody as well, and pass that on. I think there's lots of things that we do as people that we don't realise how powerful it is to somebody else. your everyday actions have a massive impact on somebody else. So I'd say definitely do that. And through that process, as Clive mentioned about volunteering, we can then start, if everyone does their own bit, it has that ripple effect out, really. I think the other thing is not being afraid of having sort of difficult conversations. And I think Black Lives Matter and everything that's happened this year, I think there's a number of different things that have aligned at the same time. So if we think about COVID, people have been restricted, people have been frustrated, those two things meet together. And then this has opened up, but I don't think it's anything new. This hasn't been a thing that's happened this year. This has been, you know, a multi-generational thing. And I think it's about then not being scared to get involved in that conversation and not being, people aren't blaming each other. These biases that are there aren't necessarily that person's fault. It's what society has done, and we have to be open to change that, really. And I think just final point for me on that bias is that it can come from all places. It's irrelevant or irrespective of the colour of your skin. You know, as a black person, you can still have biases towards other black people based on what society has told you. And you know, I've got first-hand experience of what that's like. And so when you reflect back on it and you think, well, actually, yeah, if I can be impacted by that, we can't blame other people, but we have to try and explain in a way that's non-confrontational and welcomes people. And so that's me talking about race. I'm sure that could mirror for other areas of diversity.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you so much, everyone who's commented there. This is such an important topic. It almost feels a disservice to kind of time wrap it, but I am conscious of the time. But thank you, Leon, for sharing that there, and for everyone, Matt, Clive, Priyanka. I think it sounds very much about a message of inclusivity, which is obviously ironic that we all play a part in this inclusive or exclusive world that we want to create. So thank you so much for your comments. It feels like we should do a podcast to do something much bigger for an hour long. There's so many topics here. But thank you, Leon, Matt, Clive, Priyanka, for your time. And Ria, maybe passing back to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I think that was brilliant. And yeah, I think we could have gone on for so much longer. I'm ever so sorry that we did have to time wrap it. Like, it would have been brilliant to continue, but appreciate everyone's got lives to lead. And I also do have a meeting to attend at 11:30 as well. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, because I appreciate we didn't really get to a full Q&A there at the end, please do drop me an email. It's ria.blackburn@banty.co.uk, or just, you know, send me a message on LinkedIn, and I will forward them to the speakers and panelists. But thank you everybody for coming, and for everybody that's spoken and contributed. Really, really appreciate your time, and hopefully it's been a useful event for you to attend. And enjoy your weekend, everyone.